Welcome to Hume Module 4. We have recently gone through 3 examples that Hume gives to prove that identity is basically a construct that our mind comes up with.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to recap them in detail, do we?
No, just basically in the few short moments since the last module I've got a cold. No, basically that we suck at figuring out an identity.
Pretty
is
much.
how I would sum it up.
We love the idea of identity and we chuck it on things even when we shouldn't.
Yep, and that we clearly are looking at all these diverse objects all the time and putting identity on it without even really thinking it.
Yeah, and it helps
I think he shows that quite well, especially like with that last example to do with like how if something changes a huge amount, we clearly do think it's got a different identity.
Yeah.
Like my
and that's because it disrupts the ease of the mental transition.
Yeah, exactly. But if it changes slowly, but even almost an equal amount, ultimately, we're much less likely to think it's changed identity.
Yeah, and also if it changes in a way that's proportionate to the size of the object, we're more likely to keep the identity. But if it changes in a disproportionate way, we're more likely to change it.
Yep.
Rightio, here are some key terms that you will need to understand this module. Numerical identity and specific identity. Now, I have to confess that I don't actually know exactly what he means by specific identity, but I assume it's kind of in contrast to numerical identity. Numerical identity I can explain, so I'll do that now, okay? So, in our cutlery drawer at home here, we have 2 spoons, don't we?
Yep.
Okay. Now, the spoons are exactly the same type of spoon. They're like from the same set, you know what I mean? Same shape, same size, same design, same colour. What we would say about those spoons is that they are qualitatively identical, as in their qualities are exactly the same. Their size, their shape, all of that. However, they are not numerically identical because they're not occupying the same space at one time. It's called numerical identity because, like, you can count it, right? So if I count those spoons, there are 2 spoons. They're not the one same spoon. Something can only be numerically identical with itself.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So numerical identity is like true strict identity, as Hume would describe it.
Yeah.
You are only the same as yourself if there are no changes to you.
And so where does this idea of specific identity come from?
Well, he contrasts it with... So I think specific identity...
So it's referred to in this text?
Yeah, sorry. So just keep listening and we'll cycle back to an example that uses these terms where I'll talk about specific identity as well. All right, here is Hume's 4th example. This example relates to the ship of Theseus thought experiment that we've done in class. Yeah. Okay, so Hume's saying in this top little section here, basically this first dot point can be summarised as, okay, well, even if the changes to an object are introduced gradually and all this stuff so that we can actually trick our minds into thinking they're the same, even if we do all that, if there is a big change to something, our mind is going to think that those 2 things are diverse, right?
Yeah.
However, he's like, even if there is a big change to something, our minds can still be tricked into thinking that something is identical if there is a reference of the parts to each other and a combination to some common end or purpose. So, this relates to the ship of Theseus experiment because, as you know, there was a massive change to that ship because every physical part was replaced in that ship.
Yeah.
However, a lot of people still think that the identity of the ship was retained because all those parts, no matter how they change physically, all related to the common purpose, which was to build that ship and have that ship sail the sea.
Okay.
So he's saying this is another way that we trick our minds into thinking that stuff has identity.
Cool.
And in example 5, Hume kind of just extends on this a little bit. So he's said that if something, if the parts of something relate to a common purpose, we're more likely to give them an identity. And
is this like the causation idea as well?
yeah, it is. So here he's saying we're even more likely to give things, ascribe an identity to things if they have the reciprocal relation of cause and effect.
Okay,
so remember a couple of modules ago when we defined causation?
Yep.
This is another one of the relations that Hume thinks makes us more likely to ascribe identity to something. Remember, so there was resemblance, contiguity, and now we're up to causation.
Yep.
We didn't really do contiguity because he doesn't really talk about it. But okay, so an example he gives here, he actually gives a few different examples which we'll go through. But the first one is an oak tree, right?
Yep.
So an oak tree starts off as this tiny plant. I always thought it started off as an acorn, but
Yeah.
anyway, he talks about a small.
No, but I think the acorn, a seedling comes out of the acorn.
Oh, okay.
Like
so
that's
this is
that's more progressed.
acorn.
The acorn doesn't just sit there, and then all of a sudden you have an oak tree coming out.
No, but why wouldn't he talk about the acorn? I thought it would be even
okay.
more powerful. But anyway, so he says there's a small plant of an oak, which eventually, as we know, turns into this massive tree. Oak trees can be huge. And, okay, so when you think about it, the small oak tree, because it's gradually changing, you could say that it's causing the huge tree.
Yeah.
Because bit by bit, different parts of that small tree cause it to become a larger and larger tree. Yep. So he's saying that in that case, we are, even though obviously this tiny plant is very different from the huge tree, we're more likely to ascribe the same identity because they are related by cause and effect.
Cool. Good. So.
Do you like this slide?
Yeah. So let me guess them. We've got clearly a baby becoming a man.
So that's the same as like an oak seedling becoming an oak tree. Oh, and he says with the infant and the man, he's like, the infant can grow up to be the man. He can be either fat or lean, I think is what he says. And we still call him the same man because it's related by causation.
I don't quite get the church one.
Okay, let's do the noise one first. And this is where we link back to specific and numerical identity.
Yeah.
Okay, so bear with me here. If you hear a noise, these two things represent noises. So imagine it's like a beep.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
Imagine you hear that noise, and then a minute later you hear beep again. Are you going to call that the same noise?
I'm going to call that annoying. Yes, I will call that the same noise.
Why would you call it the same noise?
Because it's the same noise. Made the same pitch of noise and hit
Well,
my
actually,
ear the same way.
Okay.
It's more annoying the second time.
In terms of numerical identity, you're wrong. It's not the exact same noise. It's not, because it happens at a different point in time. The reason that you're getting confused, Hume would say, is that it's coming from the same source, which is me.
But what if it's the exact same noise?
Well, it's not numerically identical. It's not the same noise because
Yeah, but nothing's going to be numerically identical.
Yeah, apart from, that's what I mean. A thing can only be numerically identical with itself. Right? But we're inclined to attribute the same identity to it if it comes from the same cause. So there's the cause and effect thing coming back in again. Yeah. And the final example he gives on this kind of similar theme is this idea of a church. He talks about what if a church made of brick, which is the one on the left, what if it gradually decays and is destroyed? And then the parish, meaning the parish is like the community of churchgoers, builds it again out of freestone. I didn't really know what freestone was, so I just put a church made of stone. He says sometimes, even though those two churches are really not the same at all, they're made out of completely different materials, we would be inclined to say that sometimes we'd be inclined to say they're the same church because they come from the same cause, kind of, as in the same parish built each one. I know, but he does actually say in this case we might be less likely to give them the same identity in this case because it seems like a bigger difference. It disrupts our mental transition.
I would definitely think that they're different.
Yeah, but he's just giving it an example of something that we might call the same because it comes from the same cause.
Cool.
All right, example 6. So in example 5, Hume has been talking about the idea of causation.
Yes.
And he was using that idea to explain when there is a major change in something, we still sometimes say that it's identical if there's this relationship of causation. Yep. Example 6 is kind of along the same lines. He's saying if there is a major change in something, usually we would say it's diverse.
Yeah.
But one other exception to that is when the thing itself is a changeable thing. So, for example, a river. He gives this example.
Yeah.
You can see in this river that it's very changeable. Like, you can imagine, the waves are constantly crashing.
Well, it's just constantly different water.
Yes.
If you were to look at a particular point
Yep.
and just be like, it's
literally never the same.
It's constantly different.
Yep, absolutely. So the river, we can say, is something that is in its nature changeable and inconstant. But so, do you get the point that's being made here?
Is the same.
Don't go off on a tangent, please.
Yeah, okay.
Do you get the point that's being made here? The river we expect it to be constantly changing, and therefore, even if there's a massive change to it,
Like a flood
or something, we still tend to say it's the same river because we expect that from it. Yes, any of the aforementioned major changes to rivers don't matter because...
So what's this example of? An example of something that we completely, blatantly accept, majorly, constantly changes.
Yeah.
But we give it an identity.
Yeah. So, again, this is an example...
we need to call it something. Sorry, I'm just having an existential Hume crisis.
He's having an existential crisis, which is mispronounced. An existential crisis. Oh, Timmy, it's okay. It's a safe space for your crises.
But you have to call it something. You can't just be like that body of constantly changing water.
You're agreeing with Hume that it's a construct.
No, I'm agreeing... No, well, mate, I don't know.
Anyway, the major point to take away from this is that it's all in our minds, If, the big change to the river does not disrupt our mental transition about the river because our mind is naturally expecting change anyway.
Yeah. So all our minds are this bundle of perceptions and our habit of coming up with some wacky identity to make sense of those perceptions.
Exactly.
Because the idea of naming a river is just so wacky.
Tim's not very happy with Hume.
Farewell.
Bye.